and welcome back to In the Ladies' Room. It's me, Alejandra. I say that like it's a little jokey joke, but honestly, as much as I often use this as a thumbnail photo for me, I should probably just start calling my series that. It would make a bit more sense. Now, see, I live and work in the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
I live on the south side, to be exact, a vibrant and exciting neighborhood with some of the best views from even the dingiest back alleys, like the one behind my apartment. However, we're also surrounded by a large one-stop grocery chain called Giant Eagle. The good news? These places are hiring massive amounts of people, which could put some much-needed cash into your pockets. And you would technically be part of a union. But Giant Eagle has what many have called a monopoly in the area, with criticisms ranging from buying land solely to deny competitor spaces to outright buying buildings formerly belonging to competitors and rendering them as nothing but empty structures. Some local papers have tried to spin the clustering of these stores as a perceived monopoly, using fuzzy logic and some bad math to create graphs that seem to show there's some competition. One graph argued they weren't a monopoly because there existed a large amount of bulk supply stores, the kind that require memberships like Sam's Club. The other interesting thing is, Giant Eagle, while being union ran, is ran by a union frequently criticized as being more or less dictated by large supply stores. They operate in 2020 under what is essentially the same contract negotiated in 1984, with the only real changes coming in 1992 for full-time employee wages. At a time when over 20,000 people in the counties that make up what is generally referred to as the greater Pittsburgh metropolitan area, you would assume companies would be taking more precautions to assist workers who, let's not dance around it, are at risk every single day of exposure and retransmission of COVID-19. On paper, the UFCW has a guideline and temporary rules for dealing with the coronavirus, which includes stay-at-home precautions for anything from fever and runny nose to those who feel at risk because they happen to have immunodeficiencies, conditions ranging from genetic predisposition towards a lower immune system to certain types of arthritis all the way up to HIV. Now, that's a broad spectrum, but also a spectrum many in this world deal with, and in particular, many in Pittsburgh face. I received a message on Twitter that had me questioning the UFCW about the offering of healthcare benefits in job listings, and why they've not tried to negotiate for better healthcare for variable rate employees. They gave one reply, which was a non-answer and completely nonsensical. I say this because the company is hiring part-time employees. In terms of their union contract, that means variable rate employees. Individuals working schedules that have weekly hour changes, 16 hours one week, 34 the next, and so on, are considered to be variable rate employees, not part-time. Now, the reason I make this distinction is because based off of their union contract, variable rate employees aren't eligible for any union benefits until the following year. This means you could be hired as a pharmacy technician, potentially filling the exact medications you're on, all while being put at 4 times the risk of catching COVID-19. And you would still have to pay out of pocket for the next year. You could potentially be paying into the union and never see a benefit. Not just from being sick, but perhaps you have a disability, or perhaps you're of the belief that sexual or racial prejudice has no place in the workplace. And the union will allow for your firing. The message I mentioned on Twitter showed a photograph of a sign posted by the time clocks of all Giant Eagle stores. It informed employees that they must have a physician's note if they have a fever or if they feel unsafe due to the current COVID situation. This means 3 things. 1, massive amounts of employees will now be filling into emergency rooms and urgent cares, especially as flu season approaches, just so they don't receive any points off leading them one step closer to a termination. And it also means one check more having union payments deducted, without having any protections or payments for the medical bills they're racking up when doing so. 2. It also signals to employees without health coverage who are within this 1-year limbo of paying for the union experience without receiving it, that perhaps it would be better to ignore that fever. Who knows? It might just be a cold. It's okay. Which, frankly, is alarming, as any potential employee could be a vector to another 1,000 cases. And lastly, there's the clear signal that no matter rules or guidelines the union gives, you have to choose between following an organization that claims to protect you or one that is paying you. Incidentally, you'd also be paying them a cut from that as well, for little to no substantive benefit. Normally, I'd say that sounds a little bit like a Ponzi scheme, but I digress. On May 1st, 2020, during the general workers' strike against Whole Food, Salon reached out to the UFCW about the numbers of infected people. They claimed 72 of its members have died, and just a little over 5,000 are not at work due to circumstances surrounding infections. As of October, they have yet to release any up-to-date figures. It's time we look at places like the UFCW, which covers everything from store clerks to call center employees to information technology professionals. It's time we discarded the ways of hoping companies will see that employees come before profits. Many companies are already looking past their rent in the name of profits, all while denying basic adherence to set guidelines. For example, if you work in the state of Ohio, as I've found out filming my first video and going through subsequent quarantine process, many petrol stations, including those owned by Marathon and Giant Eagle, aren't enforcing mask policies on their customers. You can now go through an entire red zone county in that state and encounter someone completely intoxicated on a Friday night, yelling, and I'm firmly of the belief that if you could afford a case of White Claw, you can afford a mask, and that chain stores can definitely afford boxes of them. Now, I want to take a side note here to mention that I don't mean intoxication is a state of which people cannot be. I mean, intoxication generally means that you're more likely to get closer to people, be friendly, be jovial, joke around, laugh, talk louder, which increases the spread. An injury to one is an injury to all of us as workers.
So, all that said, am I anti-union? And the answer is no. I'm anti-bad unions. I'm anti-unions that don't stand up for the very workers they claim to represent. That's why I support the IWW, one big union, a union that's not afraid to strike, a union that has been on the forefront of calling for a general strike during the entirety of the coronavirus pandemic.
The IWW has historically, and even today, helped shape the way workers hold their bosses and corporations accountable. In this area, look no further than McKees Rocks, which has had no less than 5 strikes, pivotal to the National Labor Union movement, all led by the IWW. The IWW is a worker-led union dedicated to direct action, workplace democracy, and industrial unionism. We want our workplaces ran for the benefit of workers and our community, rather than a handful of bosses and corporations.
It's time that we as workers say no. We're not going to just dig ourselves into debt even more to prove to the fact that we don't feel comfortable working in a situation that could potentially expose us to a virus that has so far in the western counties of Pennsylvania killed 22,000 people. That's the same number of the total amount affected in the month of March for the United States. So, on that somber note, from the ladies' room, on a undisclosed campus on the north side of Pittsburgh. It's back to you in New York. Victory.